Hello, and welcome to this quiet corner of reflection. I invite you to find a comfortable space, to let the noise of the day fall away, and to allow your soul to breathe. Today, we are going to walk gently into one of the most profound and perhaps most unsettling questions the human heart can ask. It's a question whispered in the dead of night, cried out in moments of grief, and pondered in the stillness of our own mortality. The question is this: does God choose the day you die? This isn't a simple theological puzzle to be solved. It's a question that carries the weight of our love, our loss, and our deepest fears. It touches the fresh wounds of those who are grieving and the quiet anxieties of those who look to the future. Because of that, we will not treat it lightly. We will not search for easy, black and white answers that dismiss the beautiful, painful complexity of life. Instead, our journey today is one of exploration. We will approach this mystery not with the goal of conquering it with logic, but of learning to find peace within it. We will look at it through the lens of Scripture, not as a rule book, but as a grand and beautiful story of a God whose defining characteristic is love. This is a conversation about God's sovereignty, yes, but it is also about His heart. It's about life, loss, trust, and the unwavering hope that holds us even when we cannot understand. So let us begin, not with fear, but with a gentle curiosity. Let us seek not to unravel the mind of God, but to rest in the safety of His hands. Section 1. The Grand Weaver, Exploring Divine Sovereignty. To begin to even approach our question, we must first sit with a concept that is both comforting and immensely challenging: the sovereignty of God. This is the idea that God is the ultimate authority, the supreme power, and the loving overseer of all creation. Nothing happens outside of His knowledge or beyond the reach of His power. The Bible often uses beautiful poetic language to describe this all-encompassing care. Perhaps no passage speaks to this more intimately than Psalm 139. The psalmist, David, writes a breathtaking hymn about God's personal, intricate knowledge of Him. He says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Let's just pause and hold that last phrase in our hearts for a moment. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. This is one of the clearest biblical expressions that seems to point towards a yes to our question. It paints a picture of a God who is not a passive observer of our lives, but the loving author. Before we took our first breath, He saw our entire story, from the first page to the last. The number of our days, this verse suggests, is not a random accident, but is known and held within the loving mind of our Creator. The book of Job echoes this sentiment. In his suffering, Job reflects on the frailty of human life and says of humanity, "A person's days are determined. You have decreed the number of his months and have set limits he cannot exceed." Again, we see this language of a determined number, a set limit. It suggests a boundary, a framework for our lives that is established by God Himself. It can be helpful to think of this through a metaphor. Imagine God as a grand weaver, working on an immense and intricate tapestry that is the story of all creation. Each of us is a single thread. From our perspective down here on the floor, all we can see is the underside of the canvas. It looks like a chaotic mess of tangled knots, random colors, and threads that seem to be cut off too soon. We cannot see the pattern. We cannot understand why a beautiful golden thread is suddenly tied off, while another, seemingly less vibrant one, continues on. It all seems confusing and often heartbreakingly random. But the weaver, from his perspective above, sees the grand design. He sees the breathtaking picture that he is creating. He knows how every single thread, every color, every knot, and every ending contributes to the final masterpiece. He knows that the golden thread, which seemed to us to be cut short, was actually the perfect length to create a highlight in the eye of a central figure, giving the entire work a depth and beauty it would not have otherwise had. This perspective of God's sovereignty is not meant to be a cold, deterministic fatalism. It is not about a cosmic puppet master pulling strings. The Bible presents this truth as a source of profound comfort. The God who wrote our days in his book is the same God who knit us together in our mother's womb. His oversight is born of intimate, personal, and creative love. It means that your life, no matter how long or short, is not a meaningless accident. It is a story with a purpose held in the mind of a loving author. It means that no one is forgotten. No life is a footnote. Every single thread is essential to the weaver's grand design. In this view, the moment of our death is not a surprise to God. It is not a moment where his plan was thwarted or his power failed. It is the moment the author writes the end to a chapter, knowing that it is the perfect and right ending for that part of the story, within the context of the much larger, eternal story he is telling. It is the moment the weaver ties the final knot on a thread, not as an act of destruction, but as a completion of its unique and beautiful purpose within the tapestry. This is a high and mysterious thought, and it does not immediately answer all our questions or heal all our hurts. But it provides a foundation. It invites us to consider that our lives are held within a story that is bigger, wiser, and more loving than we can currently see. Section 2. The open page. Human choice and responsibility. If we only stayed with the idea of God's absolute sovereignty, we might conclude that we are simply actors reading lines from a pre-written script, with no real say in our own stories. But this is only one side of the rich, complex truth the Bible presents. Alongside the theme of divine sovereignty, there is another, equally powerful theme: the reality of human choice and responsibility. The Bible is not a book of fatalism. It is a book of invitation. From beginning to end, God calls out to humanity, choose life. In the book of Deuteronomy, God says to his people, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live. This is a genuine choice. It implies that the decisions we make have real, tangible consequences, including consequences for the length and quality of our lives. The book of Proverbs is filled with this kind of practical wisdom. It constantly contrasts the path of wisdom with the path of folly. It says things like, "The fear of the Lord adds length to life, but the years of the wicked are cut short." Or, "For through wisdom your days will be many, and years will be added to your life." These verses strongly suggest that our choices to live with wisdom, integrity, and reverence for God, or to live with foolishness and recklessness, have a direct impact on our lifespan. How do we hold this in tension with Psalm 139, which says, "All our days are written in His book"? This is one of the great mysteries of faith, the interplay between divine sovereignty and human free will. Perhaps the answer isn't either or, but both and. Let's go back to the metaphor of God as the author. A masterful author doesn't just write a plot. They create characters with true personalities, motivations, and the capacity to make their own choices. The author knows the end of the story, but the beauty of the story is in how the characters get there. The choices they make are real, and they shape the narrative. It's possible that God, in His infinite wisdom, has written our story in such a way that it incorporates our genuine choices. He knew from the beginning what we would choose, and He has woven those choices and their consequences into His ultimate, sovereign plan. This means our choices matter profoundly. God has given us the incredible gift and responsibility of stewarding the lives He has given us. When we care for our bodies, which the Apostle Paul calls temples of the Holy Spirit, we are honoring the giver of life. When we make wise decisions to not drink and drive, to eat healthfully, to seek peace with others, we are participating in God's life-sustaining work. Conversely, when people make destructive choices through addiction, violence, or recklessness, they can bring about a premature end to their lives or the lives of others. This is a tragic reality, a consequence of living in a world with genuine freedom. This perspective is crucial when we are dealing with grief, especially when a death feels preventable. The mind can be a torture chamber of what-ifs. What if I had called them that night? What if I had noticed the symptoms sooner? What if I had stopped them from going out? This line of thinking comes from a place of deep love, but it also assumes that we held the final power, that one different choice could have rewritten the ending. The both-and perspective can offer a gentle release from this burden. Yes, our choices matter, and we should always strive to choose life and wisdom. But ultimately, we are not the authors of the story. We are characters within it. We are responsible for our choices, but we are not in control of the ultimate outcome. We can acknowledge the reality of human error and tragic choices without taking upon ourselves the crushing weight of being the sovereign lords of life and death. God's book of our days is not a rigid, unchangeable script that we are forced to read. Perhaps it's more like an open page, where the author, who knows the end, invites us to co-write the sentences and paragraphs of our lives through our real, meaningful choices. He works His ultimate purpose in and through those choices, in ways we often cannot comprehend. This calls us to live wisely, to love well, and to act responsibly, while at the same time resting in the knowledge that the final pen is in His hand, and His hand is guided by perfect love. Section 3. The broken world, tragedy, evil, and untimely death. We have talked about God's sovereign plan and our human responsibility. But now we must wade into the deepest, murkiest waters of this question. How do we make sense of what feels like a truly untimely death? The death of a child in a terrible accident. The death of a young mother from a cruel disease. The death of an innocent victim of violence. If God has numbered our days, did He write these tragedies into His book? Did He plan for this suffering? This is where our theological frameworks can feel brittle and our hearts can cry out in protest. To address this, we must acknowledge a third, crucial element in our discussion. We live in a fallen, broken world. The Bible's story does not begin in a world of cancer, car accidents, and war. It begins in a garden of perfect harmony, a world where life was meant to flourish without the shadow of death. The story of Genesis 3 tells of a rebellion, a choice to turn away from the giver of life. The consequence of that choice was the entry of sin, brokenness, and death into the world. They are, in a sense, intruders. They are not part of God's original perfect design. The Apostle Paul describes this reality in his letter to the Romans, saying that the whole of creation was subjected to frustration and is groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Our world is groaning. It is beautiful, yes, but it is also fractured. Natural disasters happen. Bodies are susceptible to disease, and human hearts are capable of great evil. This is the context in which we live and die. So, when a tragedy occurs, is it God's perfect will? The Bible seems to make a distinction between God's decretive will, what He sovereignly decrees to happen, and His permissive will, what He allows to happen within this broken world. God may permit things that He does not desire. He may allow the consequences of humanity's fallenness to play out, even when it breaks His own heart. God is not the author of evil. He does not tempt, and He does not delight in suffering. The Bible is clear on this. So when a life is cut short by a drunk driver, it is not accurate to say that God caused the driver to drink and get behind the wheel. It is more accurate to say that God, in a world where He has granted free will, allowed the tragic consequences of one person's sinful choice to unfold. But He is not a distant, passive observer of this pain. He is present in the midst of it. The shortest and perhaps most powerful verse in the entire Bible is Jesus wept. He wept at the tomb of His friend Lazarus. This is a staggering thought. Jesus knew that in a few moments He was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He knew the happy ending was just around the corner. So why did He weep? He wept because His friends were hurting. He wept because He was face to face with the brutal, ugly reality of death, the enemy that had invaded His good creation. He wept out of empathy, out of a shared sense of loss and grief. This tells us something vital about the heart of God. When we suffer a devastating loss, God does not stand aloof, checking a box on a cosmic calendar. He draws near. He enters into our grief. He weeps with us. The book of Ecclesiastes acknowledges the seemingly random nature of life in this fallen world, saying, "The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, but time and chance happen to them all." This is a starkly realistic admission that, from our limited perspective, terrible things can happen for no discernible reason. So how does this fit with the idea of our days being numbered? This is the deepest part of the mystery. Perhaps God's sovereign plan does not operate by causing every tragedy, but by working within and through every tragedy. He doesn't cause the car crash, but He is sovereign over the outcome. He doesn't inflict the disease, but He is present in the sick room, and He holds the life of His child in His hands. His sovereignty means that even the most senseless evil or the most random accident cannot ultimately derail His purpose for a person's life or their soul. He is a God of redemption. He takes the most broken, painful, and evil events and he works them for an ultimate good that we often cannot see. The supreme example of this is the cross. The most evil act in human history, the murder of the perfect Son of God, was turned by God into the very means of salvation for the world. When we face a tragic death, it is okay to be angry. It is okay to cry out and ask why. It is okay to acknowledge that this is not how things are supposed to be. But in the midst of that pain, the promise of faith is that we are not alone, and that this tragedy is not the final word. The God who wept at the tomb of his friend is with us, and he is a master of bringing light from darkness and life from death. Section 4, A Prayer for More Time, the story of Hezekiah. Our exploration so far has held two seemingly contradictory ideas in tension: a God who has written our days in his book, and a world where our choices and its brokenness seem to alter life's course. Is there any biblical story that lives directly in this tension? There is, and it is a fascinating and hopeful one: the story of King Hezekiah. We find this story in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 20. Hezekiah, a good and faithful king, becomes deathly ill. The prophet Isaiah comes to him with a direct message from God. "Put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover." This seems as definitive as it gets. A direct prophetic word. The divine author has declared that this chapter of Hezekiah's life is over. But Hezekiah's reaction is what makes this story so remarkable. The scripture says, Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord, "Remember, Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion, and have done what is good in your eyes." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. This is a raw, honest, desperate prayer. He is not passively accepting his fate. He is engaging with God. He is appealing to their relationship, to his life of faithfulness. And what happens next is astounding. Before the prophet Isaiah has even left the middle court of the palace, the word of the Lord comes to him again, saying, "Go back and tell Hezekiah, I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will heal you. I will add 15 years to your life." God changed his mind, or at least, he changed the declared outcome based on Hezekiah's prayer. This story seems to throw a wrench into any simple, fatalistic view of God's plan. It suggests that the number of our days is not always a rigidly fixed point, but can be influenced by our relationship and interaction with God. It champions the power of prayer. Prayer is not just a passive spiritual exercise. It is a real, dynamic conversation with the author of life, and it can change the story. So how do we reconcile this with Psalm 139? Does this mean our days are not written in his book? Or does it point to an even more wonderfully complex and relational God than we imagined? Let's consider this possibility. God, in his infinite knowledge that exists outside of time, knew from the beginning of creation that Hezekiah would get sick. He also knew that Hezekiah would pray that desperate, heartfelt prayer. And he knew that his response to that prayer would be to grant him 15 more years. In other words, Hezekiah's prayer and God's answer were always part of the plan. The story that was written in the book was not just Hezekiah dies on this day, but the richer, more beautiful story of Hezekiah falls ill. He cries out to me in faith, and I respond with healing and more years. From Hezekiah's perspective in time, the outcome was genuinely changed by his prayer. From God's perspective outside of time, the entire beautiful interaction was part of the original, sovereign design. This is not a theological trick. It is an attempt to honor both truths at once. God is sovereign, and our prayers are powerful and genuinely effective. It means that God has not written a static monologue for us to perform, but a dynamic dialogue for us to participate in. He invites our prayers, our pleas, our honest cries. He wants us to engage with Him, to wrestle with Him, to ask for healing, to ask for more time. Sometimes the answer will be yes, as it was for Hezekiah, and we should always pray with the hope and faith that it might be. But sometimes, for reasons we cannot understand, the answer is no, or not in the way you expect. The Apostle Paul, for example, pleaded with the Lord 3 times to remove a thorn in his flesh, and the answer was not healing, but the promise of sufficient grace. Jesus himself, in the Garden of Gethsemane, prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me." His ultimate prayer, however, was, "Yet not as I will, but as you will." The story of Hezekiah gives us the courage to pray bold prayers for life and healing. It assures us that God hears and that our prayers matter. But the stories of Paul and Jesus teach us that the ultimate goal of prayer is not always to change God's plan, but to align our hearts with His, to find the grace to trust His wisdom even when the answer isn't what we longed for. We can and should pray for more time, for ourselves and for those we love. But we do so while holding it all with an open hand, trusting that the author who invites our prayers also knows the perfect timing for every chapter to close, and that His wisdom is rooted in a love that is deeper than our own. Section 5. The turning of the page. Death in the New Covenant. So far, our conversation has centered on the timing of death, but the coming of Jesus Christ, the central event of the Christian faith, radically reframes the entire conversation. It shifts our focus from the when of death to the what of death. The New Testament doesn't erase the pain of physical death, but it fundamentally changes its nature and its power for those who are in Christ. The Apostle Paul, a man who faced death constantly, wrote some of the most profound words on this topic. In his letter to the church in Philippi, he is sitting in a prison cell, unsure if he will be executed. He contemplates his own mortality and writes this extraordinary sentence: "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." To die is gain. For most of human history, and for most people today, death is seen as the ultimate loss. It is the loss of experience, of relationships, of potential, of everything we hold dear. But for Paul, it was gain. Why? Because for him, death was not a departure into nothingness, but a departure into the full, unveiled presence of Jesus Christ. He saw it as a graduation, a homecoming. He was torn, he said, between his desire to remain and serve the people he loved, and his desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. This is a revolutionary perspective. It sees death not as the end of the story, but as the turning of the page to the best chapter. It's the moment the believer is finally and fully at home with the Lord. Paul addresses this again in his famous chapter on the resurrection, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He personifies death as a great and terrible enemy, the last enemy to be defeated. But because of Christ's own death and resurrection, this enemy has been defanged. Paul writes a triumphant, taunting poem. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death, he says, is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. For the believer, death may still be physically painful, and the process may be difficult. The grief for those left behind is still real and sharp. But the ultimate terror of death, the sting of final separation from God, of condemnation, of eternal bowels, has been removed. Christ took that sting upon Himself on the cross. So when we ask, does God choose the day we die? The New Testament perspective gently adds a follow-up question. And what happens on that day? For the child of God, that day, no matter when it comes, is the day they are welcomed into the arms of a loving Father. It is the day their faith becomes sight. It is the day they are ushered into a reality with no more death or mourning or crying or pain. This does not make the loss of a loved one easy. The grief is real because the love was real. But it allows us, as Paul says, to not grieve like the rest of mankind, who have no hope. Our grief is infused with a quiet, certain hope. It is the grief of a temporary goodbye, not an eternal one. It is the sorrow of separation, but with the sure and certain promise of a future, glorious reunion. This hope changes how we view the timing. If death is a homecoming, then whether a person is called home at age 9 or age 90, from our limited human perspective, it may feel tragically short or blessedly long. But from God's eternal perspective, He is simply calling His beloved child home at the time He knows is right. The length of the journey on earth is less important than the final destination. This doesn't mean we should be careless with life or seek death. Not at all. Paul chose to live because his life had purpose in serving Christ and others. We are called to live our lives to the fullest, for as long as God gives us. But it does mean that we can hold our lives, and the lives of those we love, with a looser grip. We can entrust them to the Father, knowing that whenever He chooses to call them, or us, home, it is an act of love, a welcome into an eternity of joy, where the story truly begins. Section 6. Trusting the author. Finding peace in the mystery. We have traveled through some deep and difficult terrain. We've explored God's sovereignty, our own responsibility, the brokenness of our world, the power of prayer, and the hope of the new covenant. And still, we are left standing before a profound mystery. We do not have a simple formula. We cannot plot on a chart exactly how these truths intersect. There will always be a point where our understanding fails and our questions hang in the air. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the ultimate answer to the question, does I choose the day I die, is not a theological explanation, but an invitation to trust. The goal may not be to fully understand the plan, but to fully trust the character of the planner. Who is this God who holds our days in His hands? He is a God of infinite love. The Bible's most central claim is not that God is all-powerful or all-knowing, but that God is love. His very nature is self-giving, others-centered love. And we have the ultimate proof of this. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans, God demonstrates His own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. The cross is the definitive statement about God's character. If God was willing to endure the ultimate suffering himself, to give up his own Son, in order to save us, then we can trust that his heart towards us is only and always for our good. Any plan he has for our lives, including its length, flows from this fountain of immeasurable love. He is a God of perfect wisdom. We see so little. Our perspective is limited by time, and our understanding is clouded by pain. We see the single, confusing event. He sees the entire sweep of history, how all the stories interconnect, and how he is weaving all things, even the most painful things, into a final tapestry of breathtaking beauty and goodness. His wisdom means that his timing is always perfect, even when it feels tragically wrong to us. Trusting him means believing that he knows what he is doing, even when we have no idea. He is a God of absolute goodness. The psalmist declares, "The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made." This means there is no malice in him. There is no cruelty. He does not take pleasure in our pain. His plans are not designed to harm us. Whatever he wills or allows, he does so from a nature of pure goodness. As Romans 8:28 so famously promises, "And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him." This doesn't promise that all things are good. It promises that in the hands of a good and sovereign God, all things will be worked for good. When we are faced with the death of a loved one, or with our own mortality, our minds will desperately try to find a why. Why now? Why this way? And sometimes, there is no satisfying answer to why. The path to peace is often found when we can gently let go of the why and turn our focus to who. Who is in control? A God of love, wisdom, and goodness. Who is with me in this pain? The God who wept at Lazarus' tomb. Who holds my loved one now? The God who is a loving Father. Who holds my future? The God whose plans for me are for good, not for disaster. Trusting the author means we can let go of the need to have the entire script in our hands. We can accept that our chapter may be shorter or longer than we hoped. We can accept that it may contain plot twists we never would have written. But we can rest in the assurance that the author is good and that he is writing a masterpiece. Our peace comes not from understanding the story, but from knowing and loving the one who writes it. Section 7. Numbering our days. How this hope changes how we live. This entire exploration is not meant to be a purely theoretical exercise. The truth about who God is and how he holds our lives is meant to change us, to seep down from our heads into our hearts and transform the way we live each day. If we truly begin to rest in the loving sovereignty of God over our lives, it should have a profound and practical impact. First, it offers us freedom from fear. The fear of death is one of the most basic and powerful human anxieties. We fear the unknown. We fear loss. We fear pain. This fear can paralyze us, causing us to live small, timid lives, constantly trying to control every variable to prolong our existence. But if we believe that our days are ultimately held in the loving hands of our Father, it disarms that fear. Jesus said, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care, and even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." If God is so intimately concerned with the smallest details of his creation, we can trust Him with the largest one, the length of our life. This doesn't mean we live recklessly, but it does mean we can live courageously. We can take risks for the sake of love and for the sake of the gospel, knowing that we cannot accidentally step outside of God's loving care. Our final day will not come one moment sooner or one moment later than our loving author has ordained. Second, it inspires us to live with purpose. In Psalm 90, Moses prays, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." This sounds like a contradiction at first. If God has already numbered our days, why do we need to learn to number them? Because numbering our days, in this sense, means living with an awareness of our mortality. It means realizing that our time on this earth is finite and precious. And this realization doesn't lead to despair, but to wisdom. When we know our time is limited, we stop wasting it on things that don't matter in eternity. We start investing in what does: our relationship with God, our love for other people, and our participation in His redemptive work in the world. The knowledge that our story has a final page written by a loving author makes us want to make every sentence on every page count. It makes the ordinary moments, a conversation with a child, a quiet cup of coffee, a beautiful sunset, glow with a sacred significance. Third, it changes how we grieve. As we've already touched upon, this hope allows us to grieve honestly, but to grieve differently. We can mourn the profound loss, the empty chair, the voice we will no longer hear on the phone. The pain is a testament to the love. But underneath that real and gut-wrenching pain, there can be a solid foundation of hope. We can entrust our loved ones to the God who loved them even more than we did. We can release the burden of the what-ifs, recognizing that we were never in ultimate control. We can find comfort in the knowledge that for them, if they were in Christ, the story has not ended, but has gloriously begun. And we can look forward with certainty to the day of reunion, when God Himself will wipe away every tear. So, how shall we live? We live with courage, not fear. We live with purpose, not frivolity. We live with an open-handed generosity, not a tight-fisted hoarding of our time or resources. We love deeply, forgive freely, and walk humbly with the God who has authored our past, who is present in our today, and who holds our every tomorrow. We live as people who know that this life is a beautiful, precious, and temporary gift, a prelude to the eternal story that awaits. Section 8. The Homecoming. The final word is welcome. We have journeyed far together, wrestling with one of life's greatest mysteries. We've seen that the Bible doesn't give us a simple, one-size-fits-all answer. Instead, it paints a rich, multi-layered picture of a sovereign God who is also a relational Father, of a world that is beautiful but also broken, and of a humanity that has been given real, meaningful choice. But in the end, perhaps the best way to hold all this together is to see our life and death not through the metaphor of a book or a tapestry, but as a journey home. We are all, in a sense, travelers. We are on a long journey through sunny meadows and dark, frightening valleys. We get tired. We get lonely. We sometimes lose our way. And deep in the heart of every traveler is a longing for home. A place of perfect safety, of unconditional love, of rest. A place where we are fully known and fully loved, a place where we belong. The promise of the Christian faith is that such a home exists. Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many rooms. I am going there to prepare a place for you." From this perspective, the day of our death is not a tragic accident or a cold, calculated event on a divine spreadsheet. It is the day the Father decides it is time for his child to come home. Think of a child who is away at a long and sometimes difficult camp. The parent knows the day they will go to pick them up. That day is set. The parent looks forward to it with eager anticipation. During the child's time at camp, they might fall and scrape their knee. They might have a wonderful time swimming or a difficult time with another camper. The parent is aware of all this, communicating and caring for them from a distance. But the parent's plan is not defined by the scraped knee or the difficult day. The parent's ultimate plan is the homecoming. When the parent arrives to pick up the child might be in the middle of a game they are enjoying. From the child's perspective, the parent has arrived too soon, or the child might be having a miserable, lonely day, and the side of the parent's car is a long-awaited rescue. From their perspective, the parent has arrived right on time. But from the parent's perspective, who sees the bigger picture? Who knows what awaits them at home? They have arrived at the perfect time. The day God chooses for us to die is our homecoming day. He sees our journey. He weeps with us in our scraped knees and our lonely moments. He rejoices with us in the sunshine and the laughter. And in his perfect wisdom and love, he knows the right moment to say, "It's time, come home." For those of us who are left behind, we see an empty space at the campfire, and it hurts. The grief is real, but our hope is that our loved one has not ceased to exist. They have simply finished their journey ahead of us. They have been welcomed home. So, does God choose the day you die? Yes, I believe he does. Not as a cruel tyrant or a distant clockmaker, but as a loving father who has set a date for the greatest family reunion of all time. He has set a homecoming day for each of his beloved children. And our task, as travelers still on the road, is to trust him, to walk our path with faith, to help fellow travelers along the way, and to live with the joyful anticipation of the day when we too will see him face to face and hear the words we were made to hear, "Welcome home." Thank you for walking this gentle path with me today. May you go forth not with all the answers, but with a deeper trust in the one who holds them. May you be free from fear, and may you live this precious day with purpose, peace, and love. Be well.